Hello, Steve from Leaner by Design, and welcome to Kefir 101. In this episode we're going to be talking about equipment that you're going to need to make your own kefir, and you'll be pleased to know it's a very limited amount of kit, stuff that you're most likely going to already have at home in the kitchen or can lay your hands upon pretty easily. A few rules with making kefir as far as the storage containers and the fermentation containers you use. Really simple, but I'll just briefly run through them for you. So this is the stuff you're going to need. You can see it laid out here. You don't need all of it, like the crock for example. It's just something I'm going to talk about. The process of making fermented dairy products, kefir, when you're fermenting the product, it's quite acidic, and so you've got to be very careful about what you're actually fermenting it in, because the last thing you want is impurities in the container to leach out into your kefir, which one may make it taste disgraceful, but two, it could poison you. So the material of choice for making kefir are glass jars. Really simple. There's a few different varieties that you can get. I've just got a few here. Normal jam jar, screw top lid. Most people have got these, or could lay your hands on some. I tend to save some of the decent ones from when I've had olives or coffee or whatever, and save them up, and perfect for making your kefir. If you want to go for some rather prettier jars, you can go for something like a Kilner jar, available on Amazon and various other outlets. But these are an old style jar, so you may be able to pick some of these up at a junk shop. The lid's got a little rubber seal on it, so it seals quite nicely. You're not going to need that for the actual fermenting process. We'll talk about that in a moment. And here's another very common but quite pretty looking jars, if you call them pretty, I don't know. So it's just a jar with a flip top lid, like a spring fixing mechanism, and a rubber seal around the lid, often used for preserving, etc. Put it on, whoop, flick it down, and it's a nice tight seal. Okay, three types of jam jars. What I tend to do is, as you get going with your kefir and you've made your first few batches and you find that you're drinking more of it, or possibly family members are having some, I tend to go for a jar that will hold roughly a litre, and I tend to buy my milk in litre bottles. I buy raw milk, but you may well not have access to raw milk. I'll talk about raw milk kefir in a future video, but raw is great if you can get it, but it's difficult to come by unless you're in the right place, and I'm very lucky where I am that I can get raw Jersey pastured milk from my local farm outlet. Another option, I'll say glass jars, cheap, easy, readily accessible. You can use ceramic. You can use a ceramic or a porcelain type jar like this crock. But one thing, I'm actually making sauerkraut in here at the moment, but I just got it out just to give you as an example. This is a ceramic crock, but as you can see on the outside, it's glazed, and also in the lid, it's exactly the same inside. And this is a food grade glaze. I could make kefir in here, no problem at all, but if you had a pot like this and you looked inside and the inside surface was porous, it wasn't glazed like this, or it's like something you got out of the garden, then don't use that. If it's food grade, food quality for a kitchen and for food, you can make kefir in it. I favour the jam jars. You're going to make a lot. This is a 5 litre crock, so unless you're selling it, giving it away, or you've got a big family, making it in a selection of jars is probably your best bet. There are some other possible options that you could use, but I would just stick with like glass or glazed porcelain or ceramic as your second choice. What not to use? Plastic. Now, you see I've got a plastic measuring jug here. These are food grade as well. And you're only using this to strain your kefir in, etc. But if you're fermenting in plastic, you could well end up with impurities and chemicals from the plastic leaching into your kefir, and that's a real no-no. So plastic is definitely out. I wouldn't even use it for storage. I'd always go for glass or something like that. Another one not to use, metal. I mean, it's fairly obvious, but an acidic process going on in a metal tin or tub is going to take impurities out of the metal possibly, or it's going to eventually, rust it, cause it to rust when you wash it out, and you may not see inside, and you're going to end up with all sorts of contamination. And this is what we're looking for with kefir for storage and for fermenting, is no source of contamination into your kefir. And obviously glass is great for that. It doesn't scratch, it's not porous, perfect, recommended. If you want to use a fancy jar, get some fancy jars, but that's cool. So when we're making the kefir, we're not going to be putting the lids, we can store it in the fridge with the lid screwed on, but when we're actually letting it culture in a relatively warm place and actually ferment, we're not going to want to put tight screw top lids on, because there's gas being produced, and the last thing we want is that you get a build up of pressure, you take the lid off and it goes everywhere. So you can get some muslin cloth, you could use a piece of paper towel, or I've got just some cloth like this, which I eventually, once I've created my kefir, I put over the top, I place an elastic band around, and quite often, just to keep it together, I'll just place the lid on top. There's still circulation, there's still escape for gas with just the lid placed on top. So you need some sort of cloth or paper towel to cover up your kefir. Now, when we've been through that process, and I'll be talking about that in the next video and showing you how to use your brand new grains to actually get your kefir started, you're going to want to strain it, and I'll also be creating a video on that, so don't worry. I use a relatively fine mesh strainer. You could get a smaller one than this that will fit beautifully in the top of your measuring jug, but I just don't happen to have one, and it sits there fine and no problem at all. So when you've created your kefir, you're eventually going to pour it into your sieve. You're going to strain it through, which will put the kefir through into the jug, and it'll keep your grains, your kefir grains, which you're going to use for your next batch, in the sieve, and you can then put them back into the jar. Now the thing with kefir is it becomes quite thick, kind of yogurty. So you pour your grains in and you use just a plastic rubber spatula, and you can just push the kefir through, just push it through, and it will leave the grains in the top, okay? So another vital piece of equipment, this is really funky and sexy, it's really going to excite you. I found a chopstick to be phenomenally useful, not just for eating Chinese food. With making your kefir, you obviously want to avoid any implements that are metal in contact with your kefir. I mean, theoretically, a stainless steel whisk would probably be okay in the short term, but kefir does like to be agitated. So when you've actually got your process going and you've got it in the jar, you can go, it takes about 24 hours from start to finish. So you can go in maybe later in the evening or first thing in the morning. And if you've got a tall jar, a chopstick is perfect just for stirring. So these are my implements. We've got glass jars. We've got some sort of cloth or paper towel cover. We've got an elastic band. We could use a food grade glazed a ceramic crock or something similar. We've got a fairly fine mesh sieve. We've got a plastic rubbery spatula to push the kefir through, and we have a single chopstick. And that is it. That's all you need. So come back for the next video, and what I'll be doing is I'll be getting some fresh kefir grains as they will arrive to you when you purchase them, and I will show you how to get your first batch going, what you need to do. It's super simple. So see you next time.